Good evening. It's a week before the midterm week, and we're seeing a phenomenal turnout today. So each and every one of you, welcome to the Consulting 101 panel. I am Ha Dinh, a Vietnamese junior who is currently the president of the Villanova Consulting Group on campus. And today we're just extremely thankful that we have a very diverse panel, comprised of people from various schools, whether you are engineers, whether you are from the College of Liberal Arts and Science, whether you are business majors. We are here for all of you because I ultimately believe that consulting is for all of you. So, I will pass on to Mr. Jeff Marone here, who is currently the COO, particularly for technology at Citadel Securities. Before that, he was at McKinsey as an associate partner. So, Mr. Jeff Marone.
Hi everybody, good evening. As Ha mentioned, I am Jeff Marone. I'm a 2005 graduate of Villanova. I think this is the fourth year or so I've been leading this panel discussion. The first year when I'm speaking as an alumnus of the industry. Later on we'll talk a little bit about sort of my path and the opportunities that consulting created for me and the other panelists here. So before we get started, just to get a quick lay of the land here. So how many people, show of hands, in the audience have worked in consulting? Summer, prior job, etc. Great. Okay, so about 4 of you, so let's say 5%. How many people have either done or prepared for a case interview? Okay, I'm going with 15%. And then how many people would call themselves completely new to management consulting, strategy consulting, or here sort of learning about it for the first time? Okay, 60%. I'm going with 60%. So, so over the course of tonight, for those of you who know nothing about consulting, it's our hope that through the material I share and the experience of our panel, that you'll learn more about what it is that we do and what the opportunity is to start in consulting as for your career. We hope for those who've never done anything for a case interview to learn a little bit about the process for joining the industry. It is a unique process and one that benefits from practice and learning about it early so that you can prepare. Okay, so why don't we go to our panel. Let me go to our panel here. So why don't we just start at the end, and we'll just do a quick introduction, name, the firm you're with, and when you graduated from Villanova and what you studied here.
Sure. Mike Dokas. I graduated 2011, computer science degree. Started with Deloitte in August of 2011 at Deloitte in the technology practice.
Hi everybody, Scott Nepareni, class of 2000, electrical engineer, and I'm a managing director in Accenture's life sciences practice.
Everyone, I'm Thomas, senior associate at BCG. I graduated Villanova in 2016 in chemical engineering and business.
I'm Kyle Coleman. I am a business analyst at McKinsey who graduated last year, where I studied finance and analytics.
Hi everyone, I'm Chi-Chi. I'm a junior finance and business analytics double major. I interned at McKinsey this past summer, and I'll be returning when I graduate full-time.
Okay. So again, tonight, four topics. What do we do as an industry? What does the industry do? We talk about when we say management consulting. 2, we want to make it very real to you to understand what you would do on a daily basis. Because we recognize that what you do on a daily basis far more impacts the satisfaction that you get out of your job than what maybe the industry does. Next, what is the pitch? Why do we think it's valuable to start your career in management consulting? And then lastly, what can you do to prepare if you do find that this is something, this is a direction that you want to head? Okay, so let's just start by defining the industry. You wanted to define the industry in the broadest possible way. You could use the 1% rule. That is, if you know 1% more than your client, you can be a consultant. So in that model, almost anyone can work in the industry. But more formally, we generally talk about firms like the ones on this particular slide. Monitor Deloitte, IBM, Bain, McKinsey, BCG, etc. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can slice and dice that industry. You can say there's pure play strategy firms who focus only on strategy. There are firms who you could say are very good at HR, very good at technology, very good at life sciences. There's firms that say, give me your back office work, and that's when we talk about BPO, or business process outsourcing, and then there are accounting firms. The general trend in the industry is convergence, strategy convergence. So, historically, you could say that Bain was a pure play strategy firm, and you could say that Accenture was a pure play implementation firm. You couldn't say either of those things today. The new CEO of Bain is a transformation and operational implementation guy, which we think reflects a real commitment to Bain doing that kind of work. Similarly, if you look at PwC acquiring the former Booz & Company and branding it as Strategy and, that's an example of a firm who traditionally did not do a lot of strategy work, now, a meaningful participant in that market. So, now we've got sort of basic industry definition out of the way, what do we actually do? I'm going to turn to our panelists for an example of this in a second. But if you look at the questions on this page, they are ones that many companies would turn to consulting firms to help them with. How do we maximize the benefits of our proposed merger? How do we reduce our cost structure to improve profitability? Generally speaking, these are things that companies don't often do very much. Generally speaking, mergers are rare in companies. There are some companies where that's not true, but the majority, it's a rare event. So they're not experienced in doing that. And so they often will call on a consulting firm to help get the benefits out of a merger that they have promised to their investors. Similarly, these firms are populated by people who think of themselves as very agile, very ambitious, very creative problem solvers, who you could point at any poorly defined problem to come up with a reasonable and a pragmatic solution. So when we think about strategy work that these firms do, this is the kind of stuff that we talk about. So let's go to the panel for a second. So Kyle, can you share an example of a strategy project that maybe you worked on?
So I worked on some of the more transformational projects.
Okay, so we'll go to you in a second. How about Mike?
Sure. So right now I'm on a large bank that everyone in this room's probably heard of, and they're doing a strategic sourcing project. So they have $5 billion a year in spend. And how do they make that strategic? Today, if I want to buy water bottles, I basically just order them on Staples or Amazon or whatever. If I want to buy desks, I talk to my manager and I just basically buy them. So how do they how do they create a purchasing organization that is strategic about how they purchase things? When you're purchasing $5 billion a year worth of stuff, there can be savings to be had if you do it in a strategic manner. So talking about procuring categories. Are you buying through a catalog? Are you going online? Are you working with a sales rep? Are you doing it on a mobile phone? So building a strategic procurement organization is what we're currently helping this bank with. And like I said, they've got $5 billion a year in spend, so it's a meaningful number if we can even reduce that by 0.5%. So that's what I'm currently working on.
Okay, Chi-Chi, strategy example?
Yeah, sure. So this past summer I worked on a study, it was a healthcare study. We were helping major global healthcare provider transition a lot of their hospital sites across the U.S. into, just to give more background in the healthcare industry, trends are moving away from being traditional inpatient hospitals to more outpatient type hospitals, and a lot of hospitals like that in the U.S. are based on being traditional, so there's a lot of costs, unnecessary costs being incurred and not enough patients being seen. So basically helping our client figure out how to cut costs and at the same time still reach as many patients as possible.
Okay, great. But it's not just strategy, as we talked about, it's also operations and implementation. And this starts in the base with the idea that changing organizations is notoriously difficult to do. Generally, if you were being very cynical, you'd say an organization does a set of processes very well and repeatedly. But maybe you want an organization to start delivering better experiences for customers. Maybe you want to have sales reps behaving completely differently in the field. Generally speaking, the industry says that about 70% of those transformation efforts fail, break down in implementation. And so increasingly, our firms are being called on to help with those types of operational transformations, driving different performance over the long term sustained. So let's go to some examples, and we'll go to you, Kyle. And also, I'll just call out that a member of McKinsey, a current member of McKinsey who traditionally was a strategy firm, who has worked on all on operations work since joining. So go ahead, Kyle.
So I've done a couple of transformational projects where it overlaps the strategy and the operational side. So first you develop the strategy, say here's the opportunity. Within the transformation, by transformation I mean taking a company that's going from either a bad situation to making them solvent, or in my case, going from a decent situation to making them a superstar in the industry. And so for those projects, you work very closely with the client, which is nice. So you're working on developing certain parts of the transformation. So the transformation, say, is $100 million. There'll be 1,000 different ideas or 100 different ideas, and you're working directly with the client to say, your idea that makes up $1 million of the transformation, how do we drive that to actually create $1 million in value like you said it would? And so it's really interesting work directly with those clients on sourcing the project, identifying how much value there is, saying here's what the opportunity is and here's how we're going to present it, working to get the approvals that you need, and then seeing through that the value actually hits. And it's very rewarding to be able to say that's something you were a part of as well, while working hand in hand with the client, and not something you necessarily get on the large strategy projects where you're ultimately just making a recommendation and saying, here's our final recommendation, but you're instead working with the client directly to co-create.
Thanks, Kyle. Thomas?
Operation case.
Yeah.
So work for a car battery manufacturer, and specifically kind of my module is looking at the maintenance team. And so you can think of these like just massive plants with all these kind of long assembly lines, and these large assembly lines just break down all the time. And they had a limited number of maintenance people that could actually go and fix those assembly lines, and they would essentially just respond to all these kind of fires that are happening at the same time by basically who was yelling at them the loudest. And so we formed like a process to actually come up and how to triage a lot of those maintenance requests, how that they can actually just communicate more effectively to figure out how that they can be working with kind of the production team to make sure that all these kind of assembly lines are running nonstop, because just one of those stops for maybe 2 hours, that could be thousands of batteries that they could have actually sold. And so working through that process was pretty interesting. I mean especially some of these maintenance guys, they would just get calls at like 3 a.m. with massive pipe just burst, and there's a fire in the factory, and then kind of had no process of dealing with it other than just kind of running and responding. And so kind of working with those operators was pretty both like interesting and rewarding experiences. Ultimately they had a lot less calls in the middle of the night.
Thanks, Thomas. Scott, any examples of operational work?
Several over the years. The most recent one, my current client is one of the big 3 drug distributors in the U.S. who, in addition to getting drugs safely and securely where they need to go, they also provide various sets of services to both providers and hospital networks as well as life sciences companies. One of their companies is called the Lash Group, which is the largest provider of patient hub services in the U.S., and that's not going to mean anything to anyone that doesn't work in life sciences, but basically the life sciences companies hire them when they launch products to help get patients access to their drugs, whether it's sign them up for patient assistance programs, investigate their benefits, make sure their co-pays get taken care of, etc. So we went through a whole process to identify areas where we can automate and streamline process to make them more scalable. So it's a combination of implementing technology, adopting new processes, and then creating new roles within the organization, and actually our organization taking over some of those roles, getting back to the business process outsourcing piece. So in general, when you talk about these transformational programs, there's always an element of technology, there's always an element of process, and there's always an element of sort of people and change management. So in that vein, consulting is for all, right? No matter what background you come from, right? Whether it's a liberal arts background, whether it's an engineering and technology background, computer science, or whether it's a finance and strategy background. There's plenty of consulting work to go around for all education.
Okay, thank you. So Many of the projects you heard about are responding to events happening in an organization, but much of our work also has to do with helping clients cope with trends that are impacting the global economy and their markets, whether it's increasing cost of healthcare, navigating the wake of the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, whether it's Brexit, whether it's the impact of immigration changes, et cetera. Does anyone have an example of a project they worked on that was responding to some kind of global event or trend? Go ahead.
So my current project, as we all know, Brexit's happening. It's interesting, my firm is managing the project, and they've actually bought a piece of software from another consultancy, and we're in charge of basically implementing it. And it's about travel risk assessment. So if I'm an EU citizen and I live in Germany and I want to book a flight, so part of procurement is travel, so procuring travel. If I'm in Belgium and I want to fly to Frankfurt, I go through the system we're building for them, and it will check to basically figure out, is Brexit going to be impacted by this? What are the tax implications of me traveling, and things of that sort. And it's obviously most impactful when it's a person in London, which is the global financial center, and they want to travel to the rest of Europe or to Ireland, and basically figuring out, okay, Brexit hasn't happened. Mr. Johnson claims it's going to happen within 30 days. What happens if it does in 30 days and someone wants to travel on the day after it actually happens? This program is going to hopefully save them money and prevent the situation where someone shows up somewhere and then is denied a visa and detained, because that's the worst case that happens. They have someone that books travel, goes somewhere, and they can't get into the country and they're not allowed to leave. So this we're trying to prevent that from ever happening.
Great. So I'll share an example of this. It concerns data privacy and data ownership. So imagine today if you enrolled in a clinical trial. So a participant in testing a new drug. Over the course of that trial, you're going to have a lot of tests done on you. You're going to maybe do some kind of workout or sort of cardiac test, something to verify the efficacy of the drug, right? There's a bunch of data that are generated about you over the course of that trial. And who owns those data? Right? Historically, it's been the pharma companies who sponsor and pay for the trials. But we worked with a client, I would call a visionary client, a large pharma company, who believed that the patients who participated in the trial had a right to those data for either finding another drug, for with their other doctors. And he didn't know how to make this vision a reality. And he turned to us for help on this. And he realized that he knew that he needed some really good vision and strategy work for how to actually make that vision real. He knew that he needed analytics around the business case to convince his company and all of the other entities required to do that. He also knew he needed industry action. He knew it needed to be something, that change needed to be something that was embraced not by one, but by 15 of the largest pharma companies for it to become a reality. And we supported him over the course of 18 months in actually establishing a collaborative industry organization with a vision and a business case and a mission that later went on to have 6 large US pharma companies sign an agreement to collaborate to liberate patient data. And it was responding to the broader trend of what is happening with data in our world and who has ownership over the data that's generated about us and our bodies. Okay, so that's a whole lot of abstract talk about the industry. Let's try to make it a little bit more real in terms of what you do every day. So we'll start here. There's a whole bunch of, let's say, problem solving. And when we say problem solving, that could be, 3 people in front of a whiteboard talking about how you create a strategy to liberate patient data and what are the elements that are required and what's the ROI for that. There's a whole bunch of collecting, analyzing data, building analysis that helps support your hypothesis or refute your hypothesis. Then there is counseling clients, right? Whether it's getting them to share with you their perspective on why the transformation that you're driving isn't going to work. Maybe it's explaining to them the rationale for acting differently or the makings of the recommendation. Maybe it's getting someone who's very difficult, working on the factory floor as part of that transformation, to behave differently and to believe in the different way of working that you're trying to establish. And then lastly, as you get more senior, it's about collaborating and increasingly leading a team of consultants. People with, shall we say, very eccentric personalities, extremely ambitious, broad skill sets, and getting them to work as one team to produce one document and to have the same impact at the client over the course of, let's say, 6 to 8 or 16 weeks, and being a leader of those people and of those teams. So let's turn to the panel a little bit. Chi-Chi, over the course of your summer, what skills do you feel like you had an opportunity to develop in consulting?
I think one of the top skills I really learned to hone over the summer was communication skills. Like when people say communication skills, it's not like the study that I was on over the summer was very client. We worked very closely with the client all the time, and we were exposed to senior clients. So every day we went into the client's office, and the CEO and the president, we had exposure to those people. So I really learned how to communicate with people who per se are not don't come from the same background that I do, but at the same time still pass on what I'm trying to explain to them.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thomas.
Well, it's a broad skill in consulting. So, coming from an engineering background, I was able to kind of leverage a lot of kind of analytical and quantitative skills in consulting. So, kind of building models to help identify trends within a company, or to actually predict how a company might actually perform in the future. I've had opportunities to do that in a kind of very quantitative setting. Communication is definitely a large one that you get. Whether you're kind of dealing with your own teams, or when I was working for that car battery manufacturer, dealing with actual plant workers out kind of down south in kind of a rural manufacturing facility. And so knowing how to kind of deal with those people, as well as actually working with kind of board level CEOs. I mean, you get all of those kind of opportunities in consulting, and so you're kind of constantly learning to flex new muscles as you go in the job, and picking new things up. So yeah, it's been pretty broad, but when I kind of compare that to back when I was a student here at Villanova, it's kind of like a night and day comparison. As kind of that learning curve is really pretty steep. For your first, pretty much your entire career, you're constantly learning, which is kind of one of the benefits of the job.
Yeah, so I want to just elaborate on this point about communication, because we've heard that from both folks so far, and I want you guys to think about what this means, right? So for the battery manufacturer, there is a strategy that BCG wrote for that manufacturer that's probably the future of their company, and there's a whole bunch of data and charts around why it's valuable and why it's good that are very effective for convincing a CFO that it makes sense. But how many plant workers have ever changed their behavior on the plant floor because of a chart and data and spreadsheets, right? And that strategy depends on, let's say 90% of the people in the company behaving and acting differently. So how do you frame a recommendation and communication in ways that resonates with a huge variety of different people so that you can drive impact? When we talk about communication and storylining and narrative development, that is what we're talking about here. So recognizing we have people of a variety of different sort of tenures in the industry, Scott, do you want to talk about what growth and development looks like at this stage of your career in consulting?
Sure. So at this point in my career, and I've been doing this about 21 years now, my role at my firm is much less about delivering the day-to-day project work and more about running our business. So yes, we help our clients run their business, but McKinsey has a P&L, BCG has a P&L, right? We have companies that we're operating. We're trying to grow our margins, grow our revenue, grow our sales. So I'm doing much more of how I'm running our P&L, and I think of my account and my client as sort of a mini company, right? It's my company that I'm trying to drive growth, profitability for, and managing the relationships with the client. So really understanding what are their problems, and then what are the best parts of my firm to bring to bear to help solve that problem. So I'm relied on much less in this point in my career to be an expert in procurement or supply chain or CRM, and much more as an expert on my client's business and what's important to them, and then bringing the best of my firm, whether it's working across our digital organization, our technology organization, our strategy organization, and bringing the right solutions to the client. So if you choose to have a long-term career in consulting, which many people on this panel may or may not choose to do, and we'll get into all the reasons why that, right? Your role does evolve sort of significantly over time, and I think the nice thing about consulting is that there's not one career path. I mean, I chose to go into the client account management path. You can choose to be a deep practitioner in a particular area that really interests you, whether it's a technology or a function. You can be a deep industry expertise because I love healthcare delivery and I'm passionate about improving healthcare delivery or whatever it might be. Or you can go into a role like mine where you're much more kind of running the business and managing the relationships with your clients. So when you talk about growth at a consulting firm, at any of the firms up here, there's lots of different paths you can take, which I think is probably different than what you would get if you went in to be, work in the accounting department at Procter & Gamble, right, or whatever it may be.
Okay, cool, thanks. Okay, so let me just add these in here. So there's a lot. Shortest takeaway is you have varied and full days that all end at 8:30 p.m. I think, Kyle, I'm going to ask you in a second to talk about like a typical day for you in your current study. But if we look at a typical week, right, we see there's 2 hours client steering committee, update on Thursday. This is going to be sort of the focal point of your week in a lot of consulting projects where all the relevant stakeholders from your client are coming together to talk about progress on the project, to talk about the hypothesis, to talk about risks, to talk about what's required to move things forward. And the rest of the week really flows from that time and getting ready for it. So, a case team meeting where you're getting all the consulting team together to talk about Thursday and what you're going to get ready. Client pre-wire where you're actually sharing like certain pages of the deck on Thursday and be like, hey, Bill, plant manager, what do you think of this page? Does this make sense? Are we saying anything that like totally doesn't make sense? Phone call with customer insights group, right? You're calling somebody else and somewhere else in the organization to help get their data or information you need for that presentation, right? It all turns around on that Thursday meeting, and then you're sort of getting ready for the next one. Kyle, do you want to share a typical sort of day and week for you?
Yeah, so there is really a typical day, but the things I do throughout the week, I would say, are I do a lot of analysis. So we'll get a data set from a client, and they can say, that came on a Monday. We'll be conducting the analysis of the data, saying, here's the ultimate recommendation, putting that together on a slide to discuss with the internal team, then iterating on it, going back and adding some additional, ultimately circulating it with the client, attending client meetings on other topics throughout the week, adding in more analysis. It's kind of just ad hoc analysis, all leading up to there is a steerco pretty much every week at most clients, or every other week. And so a lot of that is prepping the topics that are going to be discussed at that steerco and running those through some of the behind the scenes stuff to prepare both people that are going to be in that meeting, but also prepare the overall deck for that meeting.
I would say this idea of once a week check-in, this is probably the most common way to think about a consulting project, but increasingly as we get into these operational transformations, operational implementations, it's less about having one meeting a week when the consulting firm comes in and says this is how we're doing on the project, and more about embedding ourselves into the management teams, into the operations of companies to drive different outcomes and different performance. So this is no doubt changing. Okay, so actually let's do this. So why don't we start with the panel? So we're going to do this across the board, and why don't we start at the end? So let's talk about, so what was your path to consulting? Why did you choose to get into consulting?
Sure, it's a good question. Like I said, I came here, intentionally did not study business because I thought I wanted to get my MBA. So I thought, okay, what is hard and difficult and will get me a good job? Computer science seemed to fit that bill. And then I interned at a bank, actually my first client I interned at when I was here. And I quickly realized I did not want to be chained to a desk all day, every day. If the market was open, I was chained to that desk. So I decided, okay, don't want to work on Wall Street. I also did not want to live in New York. from the area. And so I thought, okay, what can get me to a top 10 MBA school quicker? Consulting seemed to, again, check all those boxes. I then started consulting, and I clearly have not left 8 years later. But that was sort of what drew me initially. And when I was here, I did a whole bunch of things, from newspaper to Blue Key to mock trial to Greek life to a few other things. And I was like, what is the commonality amongst all of these things? And the commonality was they all kept me interested. They were all different, and they all had a really good set of people around them. And consulting, again, different projects, different teams, different locations, different problems. The variety is what initially drew me in, and it's what has kept me here, and I haven't left, because every project is different with a different team in a different location. And even if you're solving a procurement problem, the same type of clients, they're all going to be unique and have different nuances. And so that's sort of what drew me in and what has kept me here thus far.
So I, to be very frank, I became a consultant because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I was an engineer, knew I did not want to be an engineer. My father convinced me to get my engineering education and degree, which I was very thankful of. So at the time, to interview with a Big 5 firm, at least at Anderson at the time, I think you had to have like a 3.7 or a 3.8 GPA. But if you were an engineer, you could get an interview if you had a 3.2. So I got an interview with Anderson at the time. I had turned down a couple offers from engineering, traditional electrical engineering jobs. And I knew I wanted to migrate my career towards business, and having an engineering degree, consulting was a great place to start, not knowing kind of what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I can probably pretty safely say I still maybe don't know what I want to do when I grow up. But that said, it's to the previous point, it's a challenge every day. You're solving problems, you're dealing with issues, different things every day. You're meeting new people, you're traveling to interesting places, you're solving interesting problems, and I've just enjoyed kind of the people aspect of the business, both meeting our vast teams at Accenture as well as engaging and working with very diverse set of clients over the years.
Yeah, so for me, similar, coming from an engineering background, kind of spent my sophomore year at Villanova working in one of the SENDAC lab, if that's still around, and kind of realized through some of the coding there that engineering was not for me, and so I actually came to the very first Villanova Consulting panel back in 2014. It's the first time this event was on campus, and
I was there.
So kind of was like listening to some of the panelists there, and kind of thought, this actually sounds a lot more interesting, because in engineering, you kind of go into engineering thinking you could design an airplane, and then after kind of by your sophomore year, you realize that you're actually not designing an airplane, you're designing a screw that goes on the airplane. And they don't replace airplanes that often, so it's not actually going to market for another like 15 years. And so I thought, well, I can still do the problem solving I did in engineering, but then, I could kind of leverage the fact that I'm kind of social and, have, kind of some soft skills too that, are kind of slightly less valued in engineering. And so then did an internship at Deloitte in their technology practice, enjoyed that. My senior year I actually took over and ran the Villanova Consulting group. And then, when I graduated, I joined a boutique strategy firm in New York, which was a great experience. There was only about 8 of us there. We got to kind of travel around the world, Barcelona, London, Hong Kong, just had a great experience. And so, kind of realized that, kind of through that process that, it was kind of a good career path for me. It kind of all started actually, attending this event, getting more involved with VCG, which you guys should all do. And then, actually just talking to a lot of people. So I spent a lot of time my senior year kind of reaching out to people that are in consulting, just finding out what they do, on a just daily basis, and just really exploring that opportunity, which I kind of encourage all of you guys to do, to kind of reach out to alumni, reach out to like professors that are here on the campus that have worked in consulting, and use them as a resource, because you don't really actually know what you want to do until you actually do it, and talking to people is a good way to figure that out. A lot of people I found, like, my classmates just kind of take, a lot of like brand name, jobs at, some of these big companies at graduation, but they do a whole lot of, kind of due diligence around, what actually interests me, what excites me. And then, kind of, 4 or 5 years later, I found that, I love work. Some of them were like, oh, I gotta get out of my job. So, I'd really kind of encourage all of you guys to, really think about it and do your homework.
I guess for me, I came to Villanova thinking that I wanted to go down the Wall Street path. However, I did an internship at a consulting firm pretty early on and realized that I liked the challenge that was involved with consulting, getting a different opportunity. I get bored of doing the same thing 2 days in a row with consulting. You don't do the same thing Monday as you do Tuesday. You probably never do that same thing again. You do a similar version, but it's always something different, something that's a new challenge, a constant learning opportunity. So I decided that I ultimately wanted to do consulting. From there, I interned, like Thomas, at Deloitte, the technology practice, and tried that out. I said, do I want to do the technology consulting or do I want to do the strategy consulting? And from there, I learned that, yeah, the technology consulting is interesting to me, but I wanted to work on those more strategic issues and switch over to that strategy-based side. And so for me, it was just a learning experience. I knew that consulting was the right place to start, but it's finding your interest within there. And that's the great thing about the industry is as the firms go to offer all the different offerings, you're able to say, I want to try a technology project. I want to try a strategy project at the same firm and really figure out what your interests are. So that's kind of why I think it's a great place to start, is you get a wide variety of exposure with different tasks every day. To echo Thomas's point, you should all join BCG. It's the best resource on campus. You should reach out to Ha afterwards.
I think for me, coming in as a freshman, I thought that I had only 3 routes. So either I did Big Four, consulting, or Wall Street. So the summer of my freshman year, I interned at EY. I did a rotation through risk advisory, tax, and audit. And I mean, it was a great experience, and I think that definitely gave me a lot of more opportunities afterwards, but I figured it wasn't really for me because I didn't really find it exciting. I just wasn't having a great time. So sophomore year, I decided to go through applied to advance because I'd done some externships with Goldman, Morgan Stanley, and all that my freshman year. Eventually, I did not get the internship at any of those banks, so I had just consulting left to try. So I applied to McKinsey, BCG, and Bain. I got through the interviews for McKinsey and BCG, then eventually went with McKinsey. And looking back at my summer experience, I feel like I will go back after graduation because I think that's one of the first environments where I was generally so challenged and everything was so exciting for me. Though it was like traveling a lot to California, Florida every single week, but every day was such a new challenge for me, and I just loved that thrill and excitement that came with it. And I really liked that. And I really liked that the client that I was working on, the value we're creating for them, and the eventual impact we're going to have. I feel like consulting is one of those industries that really gives you the platform to really drive impact and drive change within the different industries that you do work for. I think a final thing too that across the panel we've touched on is the versatility that exists with working in the consulting industry. So if you're not sure what you want to do, you can probably work in 10 different industries throughout your career in consulting or even more. So for me, it's a great way to grow professionally and to really hone your skills and develop. You're going to learn so much so quickly. Yeah, so I'll definitely recommend consulting.
Okay.
And join BCG.
Awesome. So my story. So I graduated from Villanova in 2005. I was also a computer science major. I was very interested in technology and programming and engineering really from a very young age. After Villanova, I moved to Seattle and Redmond, and I worked at Microsoft in product engineering groups. So I worked on the Windows Vista team. Sorry for that. And the MSNBC team, which back then was a joint venture doing online news between Microsoft and NBC. My role by the end was basically product strategy. So I owned the mobile strategy for MSNBC, or at the time of when the iPhone App Store launched. Really, it was a really exciting time. After 5 years, I did feel like I sort of had figured out what I needed to do in that role, and I felt a little bit like growth slowing down a bit. I went to business school. I moved to New York. I went to business school at Columbia. During my Columbia summer, I worked at Amazon as a product manager on Amazon Marketplace. And obviously very exciting company, super ambitious company, but really doing the same thing I was doing at Microsoft, and was looking for diversity and a bit more challenge. And so participated in consulting recruiting my second year at Columbia, joined McKinsey in 2012, and then was at the firm for nearly 7 years. Tremendous growth opportunity. To your point about working in 10 industries, easily can work across 10 industries and get a really rich perspective from working in that variety. So we want to talk a little bit about the development and the growth points that folks talked about here. So let's start with sort of the professional growth. An important difference between professional services and industry roles is the growth path is very defined and very aggressive. So whenever you join one of these firms, you're always thinking about the next role. If you think about a company, you join, and if you do a good job and sort of positions in leadership open up and you sort of move into them, that's all sort of very unpredictable. It's very sort of, for better or for worse, it's really generally not a defined path. Whereas like when you join as a BA or you join as an associate consultant in a consulting firm, it's 2 years until you're going to be the next level. And then when you're an engagement manager, it's generally speaking 2 years until you're going to be an associate partner, and then it's going to be 2 years until you're a partner, and then it's going to be, what are you going to do with this partner platform? And so like that in a way can, you can portray that as very like aggressive and competitive, but it's also just really about growing and developing and picking up skills along the way. So you literally are always thinking about, what do I need to do? What skills do I need to develop? What impact do I need to drive to get to the next level? And it does not feel like my personal experience. Other folks can weigh in here. It's not sort of a cutthroat thing. It feels very supported. It feels very natural, but it does feel also very dynamic and about growth. So how do we actually make that work? How do we make 2 years in one role, 2 years in the next role, et cetera, work? And we would say three parts. One, apprenticeship and feedback. So when we work on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, getting feedback about our work, sharing feedback about our colleagues' work, to develop them into more capable consultants. 2, formal training, probably some of the richest, and both in terms of quality and quantity, formal training you'll see in any industry, and I'm going to turn to the panel in a second on that. And then lastly, a personalized career. I like to say in my nearly 7 years at the firm that I never did a project except for my first one where somebody told me this is what you're going to do. It was always like, there are these options available. Which one makes most sense from a development perspective and also from an interest perspective. So the opportunity to personalize and shape your own path, we generally believe, is something that drives you to be your best, but also you to grow and develop into a future leader as a consultant or as a member of industry. So let's turn to the panel. So Thomas, I would love to hear the point about apprenticeship. So how feedback and growth through apprenticeship affects you as a consultant.
Yeah, well, kind of constantly, consulting in general is an apprenticeship model. Kind of the boss that you're currently interacting with, or I guess like your manager on a day-to-day basis, is kind of constantly giving you feedback on, whether or not it's an Excel model, it's a spreadsheet, it's, how you kind of ran a conversation with a client. And so there's this kind of constant feedback loop in which you're getting coached on, pretty much almost all aspects of the job. And so, at times, that can be a little intimidating, just constantly getting feedback. But, really what it does is it allows you to, kind of pivot in your own career and learn just very, very quickly, because, you try something, maybe you do well, maybe you don't do well, but then, say, there's room for improvement, you kind of know about it immediately. And so, in every aspect of the job, you're kind of constantly able to get better and better, which is why, everyone talks about this learning curve, but within 2 years versus into the job, it's a night and day difference between, when you first started, and, whether or not, that's your manager showing you how to do, a nifty Excel shortcut, or whether or not they're kind of coaching you how to deal with a client when they're, kind of breathing down your neck and, are not happy with the deliverable, and you have to, suddenly, appease them and actually fix the project at the same time. And And so, and that's one of the great things about the job is that, you're learning, and then you have people above you that, you're kind of almost, that are really just kind of role models that, you're kind of striving to be, when you're there.
Gigi, do you want to talk about a formal training program, whether at the start of your summer, midpoint of summer?
Yeah, sure. So throughout the summer, every 2 weeks, I had a touch with my engagement manager. We go like first 2-week feedback, and besides that, I have a development group leader. So it's usually a partner or an associate partner, senior partner within the firm, who, at least in my experience, we had a touch with midsummer and at the end of the summer, to kind of assess my progress to see how I can improve or keep doing the good work that I was doing. But just generally, both instances were just to help me do my job better. I know the first 2 weeks of the job, I was very overwhelmed and I was very nervous. I wasn't really sure what's going on, but through the feedback, I was able to take that in and do my job better. So at the end of the day, I think feedback is a great way to help you perform to the best that you can.
There we go. Okay. I think one of the points that we've talked about here is growth and development. And a big part of this is being given step-up opportunities. And a lot of that comes from doing things that you've never done before. So to the point about working in a whole bunch of industries as you look down on the left, to the right-hand side, working on a whole bunch of different topics. Or I'm sorry, on the top. To the right-hand side, to doing a whole bunch of different things. To the bottom of working in completely different sectors. And there's so much about being handed the reins of a project or being told to lead a client meeting that's just one level more risky or one level more advanced than you've ever done before. And being sort of handed that and given the opportunity to grow and develop and challenge yourself to do it. We do it all the time, and that's really what growth and development is about, and what feedback is about in our industry. The other thing is the notion of transfers and rotations, externships and secondments. So, I think almost everyone who would join in their first couple years after college would have an opportunity to do some kind of geographic transfer. So to work in a different country, a different city, or at the very least do projects outside of their local geography. And by the way, I'm talking about everybody goes and works and does projects in California. I'm sort of saying, why don't we actually go for 6 months and work in Norway, and or spend 9 months and move to Singapore. The other thing is externships and secondments. So most people who join after undergrad, also in their third year, with many of these firms, are presented with an opportunity to go off and work in a nonprofit that they're passionate about, a startup that they're passionate about, really whatever it is they want to do, and then often have an opportunity to return to the firm, maybe go to business school, have that funded, and then return to the firm. So many, many different sort of creative opportunities that are presented after your first couple years in consulting. Did anyone on the panel have, sure.
I've just done a lot of international work, so I've had opportunities to be in London for 3 months, Amsterdam. About a month ago, I was in Tokyo for a full month, and there's always this kind of formal programs where you can actually do like an externship where you're there for a full 6 months, but then sometimes when you're on a case and if the client has international locations that require you to be there, you kind of get opportunities to go there. And typically how it will work is you maybe go for 2 weeks and then you have the option to kind of go back to your home office for a weekend, or you can kind of stay out there. And so I generally choose to stay out there. So for example, I was working in London. I was splitting time between London and Amsterdam about six months ago, and then we just take a weekend and went skiing in Switzerland. So kind of taking advantage of those international opportunities is pretty much any other career that you do at Villanova is you're just not going to have those unless it's a very, very unique role. And consulting gives you a forum to do that kind of work, and kind of travel and really see the world, which is pretty exciting.
Anyone else?
Just one quick add. I think at firms like all the ones up here, they're large global organizations with businesses and clients all over the world, and like many of the clients we serve, our firms are often looking to grow in new and different emerging markets. And I think in consulting, more so than other industries, you will be presented with opportunities to what I would call accelerate your career. Back before I was a partner at the firm, I was a senior manager and presented with an opportunity to go run, a pretty significant portion of our sales and marketing life sciences business in Switzerland, right? And it would have been a career accelerator for me. At the time, my wife was just pregnant with our first child, so but we did really think about, hey, would this be a good experience for our family to go, live in Switzerland for 2 years and run a part of the business and accelerate my career. In the end, we decided not to do that, but you will be presented with those types of opportunities throughout your career to sort of accelerate your career and see new and different parts of the world.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so I just want to move through here. So, okay, so I hope what comes across here is real excitement about the kind of work that we do in consulting, excitement about the fun you have, excitement about the global perspective you get. But there's a huge element here about roles that this industry and this development prepares you for. So we look at this page, right? Facebook, the COO, Sheryl Sandberg, is a McKinsey alumnus. The CEO, Meg Whitman of eBay, was at Bain. The new CEO of Novartis was at McKinsey. Lou Gerstner was at McKinsey. Sundar Pichai at Google. Jeff Immelt, the former CEO of GM, was at BCG. Just countless examples of leaders of these organizations who are alumni of this industry. And I think it's because a lot of the skills that we talked about, problem solving, driving impact, global perspective, are things that prepare you to have impact in a variety of different organizations, in a variety of different contexts. And by the way, they also become your network and your friends. And so when people, I get calls all the time from alumni of our firm who are considering opportunities with my current organization, who are asking questions about whatever. I feel an obligation to our firm and to our industry to talk with them and share my perspective, et cetera. Similarly, I call on folks and they get back to me, right? So it is a network that you carry with you, and I think that's true for any one of the firms where our panel is today. And it's not just about leading organizations, it's also about entrepreneurship, right? So whether it's creating a compelling vision for your product, driving a team to build a product, creating a market, raising capital, these same skills are applicable to doing that as well. And these organizations that you see here are all ones who have been founded by alumni of our industry. And lastly, impact in government. So to the point about driving impact and change in difficult situations, there's perhaps no more difficult a sector to do that than government. But all of the people on this board on this page are also all alumni of the industry. So Chelsea Clinton was in the New York office of McKinsey. Mitt Romney was former head of Bain, former founder of Bain Capital. Benjamin Netanyahu in the bottom right-hand corner also was at Bain. I think there was a story of Mitt Romney being Netanyahu's engagement manager on one of their projects together, literally sitting late at night making pages in a room together. Bobby Jindal, a former governor of Louisiana, also an alumnus of the industry as well. So again, impact, change among very difficult stakeholders, we believe is something that this industry prepares you to do. Okay, so lastly, what can I do to prepare? So let's just quickly talk about the capabilities or the skills that we're looking for people who are interested in consulting. Big chunk of problem solving, whether it's conceptual problem solving, analytical problem solving, quantitative problem solving, using numbers to do analysis and develop answers. Communication, right? Can you step back from the details and say, yes, the answer is 47, but what really is important about 47 is actually that it's only 20% above 40, which makes it a very reasonable growth target, right? Tell me why. Tell me why it's important and help me understand quickly. And then lastly, leadership and teamwork. The teams that we lead and that we work with come together very quickly, and oftentimes only spend 2 or 4 or 6 weeks working together. We just cannot afford to spend a year getting used to another team, and so we look for strong leaders who can develop and shape a team's work together. And so in our assessment process, let's say in our interviews, we are looking for people who show potential in these areas. So let me just go to the panel here, and we'll just go down the line relatively quick here. We'll start on this end, Gigi. What did you do to prepare for interviews? Before we actually go there, I would say I have seen the full range of preparation, all the way from I never heard of a consulting interview and I went in on Friday and I got an offer to I spent 6 months doing this as 80% of my time. So I don't want you to. So I don't know where you are on the spectrum, but just all the answers are fair.
I think I'm more towards I practiced for like 2 days and then eventually went into an interview. I think when I first applied to McKinsey and the other consulting firms, I wasn't really sure how the outcome was going to go. So I was like, maybe I'll apply to smaller ones, like maybe ones. So I wasn't preparing as hard. And then eventually I got an offer for the first round. And I had about 4 days. I'd never actually done casing before. So I spent a lot of time using management consultant. And I relied a lot. I talked a lot to Hab, and I also contacted Professor Kelly, who I practiced a lot with. And I also spent a lot of time on preparing my responses for the behavioral aspect of the interview too. So I think a lot of the candidates forget that it's not just about the case. Like your personality and like all the work you've done, the impact, and all the other extracurriculars you're involved with on campus are just as important as the case. So I think I spent a balanced amount of time equally preparing for both of them and worked on.
I guess I prepared a little bit more than Gigi, probably not on the far end of Jeff's spectrum. I had some consulting interviews during my sophomore year, so I was preparing for those. Then every year I did probably 5-10 cases. So by the time I went into my final interviews, I'd maybe done 25-30 cases. I think it's not on the number of cases you do, it's on when you're comfortable enough. So my measure was when I can do 5 cases in a row and I feel comfortable with those cases, that's when I'm ready to go into an interview. If I do one, I do a really good job, but then I do one and I really have no idea what's going on, there's still time to go back. So I don't think there's a number. I think it's just a matter of making yourself comfortable. And it's also on that personal experience part. So thinking about the stories you want to tell, stories that highlight your skills. Generally, the content doesn't matter. It's the skills that you've built. So you could be digging a hole in nowhere. You could be building a bridge that connects 2 continents. It's not the action that matters. It's how you led the team, how you communicated with others, how you demonstrated those skills that are important to consulting is what they truly look for, and they will identify those through the questions they ask you, the way that they interview you. I'd say from as far as resources go, I know I reached out to Thomas and did some cases with him. So reaching out to alumni is always great for those final interviews, but beforehand, Management Consultant is great. There's some resources through the Villanova Consulting Group that Ha has. And just reaching out to other students, find a case buddy, someone who wants consulting more than you do, this way they don't cancel on you, and aim to run a case once a week at least. If you have a year, if you have less than a year, I'd say aim to run a case 2 times a week. And then if it's getting towards your interview and you haven't done a case yet, you should probably do one every day. But just figure out what the right structure is and start early as possible.
Yeah, so for me, I think I just got 2 months before interviewing. I've switched firms, so I've done this a couple times, but I had to re-practice cases. But basically 2 months beforehand, you start actually doing some cases, and you really have to do them with someone else. So if you were to read a case book and then kind of cover up the answer and then look at it, it's so much different than if someone's asking you to divide 56 by 5 on the spot, and then you're just gonna freeze, and so having someone actually ask you those case questions, doing mental math out loud, is just kind of the best way to prep. And then the other thing that people have said that I think is really important that no one really people don't do enough of is practicing for the behavioral and kind of fit questions. And so, because you essentially know what those are going to be. Everyone's going to ask you, why consulting? Why this company? Tell me about a time you worked in a team. Tell me about a time you solved a difficult problem. You essentially can guess, there's going to be 10 questions for you to be asked. So essentially what I did is sort of guess basically these 10 generic, high-level questions. they're either asking about like you as an individual or you in relationship to others. And just create a grid of those 10 questions and then just like line up 3 stories for each one of them. So then I'd never repeat a story. So you have your elevator pitch by yourself prepped, and you have like, time you work with like a team, prepared. So then when you go in there, it's just kind of muscle memory. So then, because you're gonna have a lot of adrenaline flowing, you're gonna be nervous. So if you can then just like already have something prepared, you don't even have to think. That's the best way to really, be prepared and get an offer. Reaching out to people is huge too. So I reached out to like everyone I could find on LinkedIn who was like at the companies I was like, interviewing for. And generally the Villanova network is pretty good. Like, don't ask for like too much time for everyone. Like, we're all busy, but like we also like know what it's like, come being in your shoes. And so, and then if we don't respond and follow up, and if we don't get back to you, I guess it happens.
Cool, thanks. And Scott, before we go to the more senior guys, so for the folks who just sort of have recently gone through the process, I just wanted like some foundational points on what we're talking about here. So a consulting interview, let's say you've heard up your case and you've heard behavioral or fit. Case is pretty similar across all firms. Fit and behavioral varies by firm. So on the case side, it's going to be about maybe, let's say, 30 minutes. And it typically will start with a business problem. So for example, Walgreens, the profitability of Walgreens stores has been varying substantially. Some stores have a lot of profitability, some stores do not have a lot of profitability. Walgreens has hired our firm to help them understand the sources of, the drivers of variability and identify opportunities to address it. And then there's a series of questions that follows that. So what do you think are all the factors? And you build this big tree of all the factors. Then an interviewer is going to hand you a piece of data. Maybe it's a chart, maybe it's a table, maybe it's a spreadsheet. What does this imply? What are the hypotheses that these data imply about the problem? Can you think of 5 to 7 different initiatives that you could launch to address the hypotheses that you just tested when you looked at the data? And then lastly, can you bring it all together and summarize it into a cohesive story for the CEO who's sort of casually walked into the team room? And that's like a 30-minute case.
CEO rarely wanders into the team.
Rarely wanders into the team room or the elevator on the way downstairs, but you are, however, called on to synthesize in 15 seconds how things are going in the project, which is not intuitive. Also to the point about what's 56 divided by 5, these cases all demand that you do math out loud, which is not something that we do in math class at college. We do math quietly. And also, when we do 56 divided by 5, the answer I'm looking for is about 10. That's what I would like from a candidate. But you can't write about 10 on a test at Villanova and get it right, right? So the point here is that none of this stuff is intuitive. We didn't really learn how to do it, and it hugely benefits from practice. And my perspective on practice is there's 2 ingredients, and I think these both came up. One, good exposure to what good looks like. So find Professor Kelly, find other members of the industry, find people on campus who know what good looks like for a consulting interview to show you. Their time is always scarce, which comes to the second ingredient, other people who are equally committed. Maybe they haven't done it before, but they're going to do a case with you every day, and they're going to skip something else to do that with you. Because they're also committed to joining the industry as well. So just some thoughts there. Scott, and you guys want to comment on your
just real
preparation?
quick, I'd be lying if I told you I remembered exactly how I prepared for my interview, but if I had to guess, I'd be more on the wing it side of the spectrum. But when I've interviewed a lot of folks for our firm over the years, and the cases are the cases, and they are what they are, but what I look for is somebody who can clearly and confidently tell stories about themselves, their experiences, and what they're interested in. Almost, that's it. Right, and really just evaluating you as much on your personality, and is this somebody that I would want to introduce to my client and work with? Much more than, did you get the case right, or did you tell your elevator pitch eloquently? Because it's a nerve-wracking situation, right? To try to do all that on the fly, and I think the people interviewing understand that, and I think if you let more of your personality come through and speak clearly and confidently about yourself, that's what people want to hear.
I would echo a few things that I've heard about doing your homework. when I went through the process, I was definitely on the wing it side, but the one thing that I did do was reach out to people from Villanova, reach out to people from my high school that were in those organizations and talk to them and try to figure out what the commonality was that I heard in all the different answers. And then be yourself and be genuine, I think, is another important factor. I actually interviewed this year and I was doing the case, and the first person, there was a prompt about data, and the person gave me this spiel about encrypting data at rest and in transit and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, that's an awesome answer. And then the second and third person all told me the exact same thing. So I went back, I was like, okay, if anyone says this, I just discount it because clearly someone told them to just repeat this. And I was like, this is not genuine, they don't actually believe it. So by half of the day, I don't think anyone in the room I interviewed this year. I just stopped asking the question because I just was tired of hearing data needs to be encrypted at rest and in transit and blah, 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 blah. It was the same 2 or 3 sentences that everyone told me. I'm like, this is not genuine. You guys just were told to say this. So do your homework in terms of talking to people and figuring out what the different firms are and what makes Accenture different from Deloitte. What are the nuances between the two firms? We do a lot of the same work, but there are definitely things that are different between our firms. And then be yourself and be genuine and don't just feel like you have to parrot out what people have told you to say.
Yeah, so I would add, that's an important point. And to the point about doing homework, right? There's videos, there's a bunch of videos on YouTube, there's a bunch of books, there's cracking the case, etc. You find framework. On the case point, you find framework, right? 4 C's, 3 P's, etc. Like, it's very obvious in these interviews if somebody is just sort of married to a textbook framework, and it's not the makings of a successful interview, right? Like, you should be able to, you should be able to have you should be able to ask a question like, which subway should I take between my apartment and the office? And then develop a framework for actually making a decision or solving that problem, right? There's nothing in any books about like that kind of framework. So the point about like personal, structured thinking is what we're after here. That's what we're after here. So I mean, another point is like we hire a bunch of people from out of the industry, like a bunch of people who graduate from PhD programs, former practicing attorneys, doctors, etc. And so like we don't actually expect them to have business expertise. What we expect them to have is like crisp, structured, deliberate thinking as the makings of a good consultant. So, I guess so. We have time for, let's say, 2 questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions for the panel. Great.
Hi, my name is T. I'm a freshman of business school. Thank you so much for coming here today. So my question is, how did you see the field of consulting change the past 5 years, and what do you think will happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
So since I've been in it for 5 years, I can say
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer it.
I'll say what seen change. I think when I first started, it was people wanted to be in front of them, in the room with them, Monday through Thursday or Friday without exception. I think some clients have gotten better at that. Today when I left, my counterpart joked, was like, oh, it's the 3rd week in a row where you're only working 3 days. I was like, Chelsea, I'll talk to you tomorrow morning at 7:30. Like, I'm working the rest of the week. But you're not required to be sitting next to them. So I think that's been, at least for me, a big change. And not spending tons of hours unnecessarily traveling. There's definitely points in time where it's important to be next to people. But I've been with my team now since January. I have relationships. I text people, I call people. I don't need to be sitting next to them. So I think for me, that's the biggest change since I started when I graduated.
I think that's a good one. From like the virtual nature of the work is definitely increasing in terms of day-to-day execution. In terms of the content of what consulting is, my opinion is that consulting is shifting away from, hey, help me, optimize my finance function, to save 10% of my operating costs. That's always going to be questions. But industries these days, whether it's my industry in healthcare or retail or others, are going through a ton of disruption, right? Whether that's technology disruption, whether that's consumer expectations disruption, and companies are really struggling with how to react to and get out in front of the different types of disruption that are happening and create new businesses and new areas of growth that are kind of outside of what they would typically view of their core business, which is pretty cool and exciting when you think about it. There's some really cool and interesting and tough problems that companies are trying to solve, and they need people with good ideas to help solve them.
Cool. That's actually good. I'm just going to draw to a close to give everybody time for the networking portion. So thanks everybody for coming out. I hope you got an opportunity to learn about the industry, learn about our excitement for it, and maybe hope a little bit inspired about the potential of working.
Yeah. Just one quick thing. First, I want to say a big thank you to all the panel members for coming out and for sharing the time. For those of you here tonight who are interested in consulting or who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Steve Kelly. I'm a professor in the management department, and I teach business dynamics to the freshmen. I teach strategy to the seniors, and in between, for sophomores, juniors, and seniors, I teach 2 consulting classes. One that's called Consulting Best Practices is really about how to solve complex business problems in an integrated way, the kind of work that consultants do. And the other is called the Consulting Practicum, where we actually have a class where you'll organize into teams and go out and do real consulting engagements with a real company. So those are both electives that are part of the management department. I'm also the advisor for VCG, so like everyone else, I really encourage you to get involved with VCG if you're interested in consulting. It'll help you learn more, it'll help you prepare. And last thing I'll do is just share my personal perspective on consulting. So before joining the faculty here at Villanova, I was with McKinsey for over 20 years. And I always get the question, why did you stay as a consultant for so long? And people who've been consultants for a long time have very different answers to those questions, but I'll just share mine. And consulting at the end of the day, as you've heard, is really, it's about problem solving. It's about working in a team with other people to solve a problem. And you're going to learn a lot when you do that. And then second, consulting is all about building relationships. It's client service. And you build relationships with clients, you build trust with clients. And over time, you influence them and advise them. So in both dimensions, it's super people intensive. You gotta love working with other people. You gotta love building relationships. I went there to learn and to be challenged, and I thought that the intellectual side of consulting is what would have me most excited. But it turns out that I was completely wrong. And it's not really why I stayed. Why I stayed in consulting for so long is actually at the essence of what consultants do, and for me, it's what was most important. And that is, when I get asked the question now by relatives who have no clue what consultants do, what did you do when you were a consultant? My answer is very simple. My job was to help other people, period. To help other people succeed. To help other people succeed at whatever was most important to them. And there's 2 flavors of that. One is for your fellow consultants. So the consultants you work with inside a consulting firm, they're all trying to grow, develop, and succeed. And you coach them, and you mentor, and you help them, right? You help the people who are more senior than you be successful. You help the people who are new at the firm learn by coaching them and mentoring them. But your job is to help your fellow consultants succeed. That's one part of the job. The other part of the job is to help your clients succeed. Not always just the institution, but the individual, the executive who has a big challenge in front of them. So that executive has a big challenge, a big problem to solve, and clear goals that they are trying to achieve. Your job as a consultant is to help that person succeed, help them be successful. Do whatever it takes so that they succeed in their role and the institution succeeds. So why did I love consulting? Why is it so terrific? You heard many, many reasons. But for me, I stayed because I figured out I really liked helping other people. And that, at the end of the day, is what a consultant does. So thanks to the panel, and you're going to stick around for a little bit, so if you want to come up and learn more about some of the individual firms, you can do that. As the VCG advisor, if you're interested in consulting, my door is always open. I'm up on the 3rd floor, and stop by, and I'm happy to chat. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jeff.